Ms. Rand, is it possible to speak in meaningful terms of a political system independent of the economic and social systems that we have discussed in previous programs?
No, it is impossible to speak of a political system independently of economics or vice versa, of economics independently of politics. Let's identify our terms clearly. What is a political system or a social system? It is a set of moral, political, and economic principles expressed in a country's laws, institutions, and government, which set the terms of the human relationships among men living in a given geographical area. The way men will conduct their economic life depends on the kind of laws in the society where they live, and conversely, a government cannot implement or enforce any kind of laws except by material means, which means by means of regulating or protecting, as the case might be, a country's economic system. After all, a man's ideas as such cannot be ruled, cannot be forced. A man is free to think inside his own mind, even under dictatorship. What he is not free to do is to put his ideas into action. And economics is one of the fields, the major field of human activity in which men translate their ideas into practice in the sense of material production to satisfy their material needs and to survive. Economics is the major fundamental field in which man expresses his ideas and his knowledge in action. No political system can exist without relationship to the field of economics, and the basic question is only what kind of relationship is established by a system, and is that relationship right or wrong? But politics and economics are necessarily interrelated fields.
Ms. Rand, what should be the relationship between the nation's political structure and the economy?
Well, that depends on the basic moral principles of a given society. When you say what should it be, I can only answer in moral terms, namely what would be the right system and not what should be done about the wrong systems. In a right, proper, that is rationally defensible system, man should be free. Economically, and the function of the government should be only to protect man's individual rights, that is, to protect him from damage by physical force, to eliminate force from human relationship, and to protect man's rights, which includes necessarily property rights. That is, in a free society, the function of the government should be to protect property and to protect contractual agreements among men from unilateral breach or fraud by one party. But the field of economics properly should be separated from the field of politics in the same way, on the same principle, as the separation of church and state. That is, there should be a separation of the power of the state, of government, from human production and trade. And the government should be there only as a policeman to keep order, specifically to protect men from anyone who wants to resort to physical force, and to protect the sanctity of contracts, of agreements among men. The government should not, and in morality does not, have the right to control or interfere in production.
Ms. Rand, what would be the political concomitant of a laissez-faire capitalistic society?
What do you mean by the political concomitant specifically?
I mean, what form of political system is, as we speak of a system today, a republic, a democracy, is a constitution necessary? Questions of that nature.
In that sense, of course, a constitutional republic is the only proper form, for an economically free society for the following reasons. If men are to be free, the system of laws which, under which they function must be objective. Men must know in advance what actions are prohibited by law and why. If a country existed, let us say, as a republic, but without a constitution, there would be no definition of the basic principles on which that country functions, and no definition of the kind of laws that the government may or may not pass. It would be, in effect, playing it deuces wild. There would be no knowledge on the part of individual citizens, nor on the part of government officials, of what kind of principles rule their given system. Therefore, anybody could advocate and attempt to pass any kind of law, and that would be complete political chaos. A constitution is necessary as a document defining the basic principles of a country and the implementation of these principles, defining the institutions which will keep a country free. It is not enough to agree on principles. If you hold, let us say, the right political principles, that will not tell you automatically how to implement them, what kind of institutions should a country establish in order to preserve and keep its freedom, in order to prevent any loophole for the power lust or the statist principles of anyone who may wish to seize power. The job of keeping a country free is very complicated. Mere knowledge of principles is not enough. One still has to implement them. And here again, a constitution is indispensable. Now, you mentioned the word democracy. Democracy actually is a very inappropriate term to apply to a free country. The literal meaning of democracy originally meant unlimited majority rule, namely the principle that a majority had the right to pass any law it pleases and the right to dispose of a minority in any way it pleased. This was the form of government in the city-states of ancient Greece, and in political thought, democracy had always been considered an improper, morally improper and politically impractical form of government. You will find in the Federalist Papers references to the fact that democracies have always have a short life and a violent death, meaning that democracies necessarily degenerate into tyranny or dictatorship, since they represent in principle unlimited majority rule. Now, this country is not a democracy, it is a republic, or was established as a republic. A republic means a free representative government limited by the concept of individual rights. It means that the majority cannot vote or legislate away the rights of a minority or of an individual. It means that the power of the government is limited, and there is a line beyond which it cannot go. It cannot legislate away individual rights. That was the original concept on which this country was formed. Now, today, of course, it's colloquially accepted to use the word democracy to simply mean general suffrage in a free country. That is a very sloppy and dangerous usage which confuses the political issues and does give many people the impression, if they don't think carefully, that this country is based on the principle of unlimited majority rule, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Ms. Rand, could you elaborate a bit on the point that you made about our own Constitution? To what extent did the principles upon which our Constitution was drawn up, to what extent do they coincide with the correct principles of a free society?
I would say to a major extent, bearing certain contradictions. Now, the Constitution, unfortunately, was to some extent a compromise between various factions among those who composed it, and the consequences of these compromises have had a disastrous effect, and we're paying for them to this day. The major contradictions in the Constitution were the right of eminent domain, for instance, which is a strictly statist principle and which today is being used in the disastrous and disgraceful urban renewal program, where the right of the government to seize the property of anyone it wishes, provided there is an alleged just compensation, a very vague term which leaves open the question who determines what is just. This power is now being used not for an alleged public purpose, but for the benefit of some private individual at the expense of others, for the benefit of private constructors who are being subsidized by the government and armed with the power to destroy anyone's property right by invoking the right of eminent domain. That's one contradiction. A wider and worse one was the right of the federal government to regulate interstate commerce, which was such a broad grant of powers that today there are voices who claim with logic that this gives the government the power to regulate anything. Because even if you do nothing but sit in your room, you are still affecting interstate commerce by means of the goods which you do not buy, if anyone wants to stretch it that way, and attempts have been made to do it. And it is predominantly through the interstate commerce clause that the actual destruction of economic freedom in this country has come. That was one of the worst contradictions. There are others, lesser ones, but of course in historic fact, the tolerance, if not the sanction of slavery, was the worst contradiction, which was not permitted, but in effect bypassed by the Constitution, and which led to a civil war, and it still remains an unresolved problem. The function of any contradiction, of course, is to undercut the rest of the document or the body of knowledge or the thinking to which it belongs. And therefore, it is tragically disastrous and should serve as a lesson to all those inclined to favor compromise, that the American Constitution, which was overwhelmingly and predominantly based on the right principles, was undercut by such contradictions as its writers permitted or accepted. And if one eliminated the contradictions, then in essence the American Constitution is the proper basic document for a free society, as it has in fact demonstrated in action.
What would you recommend to be an equitable and financially feasible type of taxation, and specifically comment on the lottery, a voluntary system of taxation, an equal versus a graduated income tax, and a sales tax?
Well, your question really, you are asking me what would I consider in regard to an ideal system. If we speak of strict principles, then of course the function of a government, you must remember this, is to protect individual rights, not to violate them. And the imposition of any kind of tax is a violation of rights in the sense that the government initiates force to seize a part of a man's income, of his property. Therefore, in principle, any kind of forced taxation is improper and is a contradiction of free society.